The waiting area at Honolulu International had that strange electric pulse only airports seem to carry. Half excitement, half exhaustion. It smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, an oddly comforting mix for travelers who'd been in motion since dawn. Rolling suitcases thumped over tile. Boarding announcements blurred together in the background like radio static. Families corralled restless kids, business travelers hunched over laptops, and tourists wore the slow, sun-drunk smiles of a trip that had finally loosened their grip. On time, she could have been anyone. A straw sun hat tilted low, oversized sunglasses masking her eyes, a loose linen shirt, sleeves pushed up. Half tucked into faded jeans, no flashy luggage, no restless scrolling on a phone. Just a worn canvas duffel that looked like it had crossed oceans. Most people in line for Pacific Airways Flight 782 barely noticed her. The boarding pass read, Emily Parker. They saw a tourist heading home from a Hawaiian escape, sun-kissed and salt-weathered, lips dry from ocean wind, in one hand. A paperback mystery novel, creased spine, pages curled from humidity, but she wasn't reading it. Her gaze moved without seeming to, subtle and precise exits, TSA agents. The man whose foot had been tapping without pause for 20 minutes. She caught the rhythm of his nervousness and filed it away. She saw the older couple in matching windbreakers near the windows, both wearing fingertip oxygen sensors, maybe post-surgery, maybe just careful travelers. She noticed the young mother juggling a baby and stroller while the father argued with the gate agent about seating. Emily Parker missed nothing. She never had. When her group was called, she rose without hurry, joining the slow-moving stream of passengers funneling down the jet bridge. The air shifted from the cool terminal to the faintly metallic chill of the aircraft cabin. She helped a young mother lift her bag into the overhead, earning a breathless thank you. Then she slid into 23B, aisle seat, tucked her duffel under the seat in front, and flipped open her paperback. Her eyes weren't on the words. They were on the subtle hum of the engines, the way the flight attendants moved down the aisle, how quickly they responded to the call light 3 rows up. Emily hadn't flown commercial in over a year, not since she'd walked away from the cockpit, quietly, without ceremony. She'd flown both commercial airliners and high-performance military aircraft, the kind that moved faster than fear. But her last assignment, a storm of politics, loss, and the kind of memories that clung like smoke, had sent her retreating from the sky. Hawaii had been her escape. Sunset, solitude, silence. She'd come to forget how heavy the air could feel at 30,000 feet. She didn't know yet that the sky wasn't done with her. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but young. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Pacific Airways Flight 782 to Los Angeles. We're climbing to 36,000 feet. Smooth weather ahead all the way to L.A. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Scattered applause from somewhere in the back. Emily smirked faintly. Pilots didn't hear clapping up front, only in the cabin, where it felt more like tradition than gratitude. The seat belt sign blinked off. People began moving, shuffling toward the lavatories, digging for snacks, trading seats, a drink. Cart rattled forward. Emily asked for water, claiming a mild headache. Truth was, she wanted to see how quickly it arrived. She watched the crew with the quiet detachment of someone who had done their job before and knew where the cracks could appear. 15 minutes in, she felt it, a faint vibration in her seat. Small, brief, but deliberate. Not turbulence. This was a trim correction, manual, not something you normally felt at cruise altitude unless the pilot was making an adjustment that the autopilot couldn't handle on its own. Emily's eyes shifted to the cabin window, scanning the wing without moving her head much. The flaps were steady. The engines sounded healthy, but there was a slight strain in the tone, like they were compensating for something. She unbuckled, leaned into the aisle just enough to glance forward. Nothing obvious. The overhead chime sounded. The seatbelt sign lit again. The the captain's voice. Casual, but a shade too rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. We've got some expected turbulence ahead." "Expected?" Emily frowned. The forecast had been clean. No storms in the jet stream. No air pressure drops. She'd checked the weather radar out of habit that morning. 10 minutes later, the plane jolted hard to the left. Gasps burst through the cabin, overhead. Bins clattered. Somewhere behind her, a drink cart went over, spilling cans across the aisle. A baby started crying. Someone muttered a sharp curse. Emily's grip on the armrest wasn't fear. It was calculation. This wasn't turbulence. Turbulence rolled or rocked you. This was a sudden corrective shove. She looked toward the front of the plane. The nearest flight attendant was bracing. Herself in the jump seat, Emily caught her eye. "Is everything okay up front?" The woman's smile was tight, her voice quick. "Just turbulence, ma'am. Please stay seated." It was the way she said it that told Emily she didn't know any more than the passengers did. Emily's gaze flicked to the cockpit door. Still shut, still locked. Something in her chest shifted. It wasn't dread. It was readiness. The same instinctive tightening she'd felt before combat training exercises. Before crosswind landings on half-dead engines, another sound. Faint but wrong. A metallic thud reverberating through the fuselage. Small enough that most people would think it was luggage shifting. But Emily had heard it before. A sound from somewhere deep in the mechanical guts of the aircraft. Then the captain's voice again, distorted, clipped. Experiencing a static swallowed the rest. Silence. No reassurance. No instructions. Just the quiet, tightening air of 100 people trying to pretend they weren't scared. Emily sat forward in her seat. Something was happening up there. And she had a sinking suspicion she was about to stop being a passenger. Emily's hands were steady, but her heartbeat wasn't. She'd been trained to control her breathing under pressure, to think in layers, to act when others froze. But there was a difference between knowing something was wrong and deciding to cross. The invisible line between bystander and participant. She unbuckled. The seat belt snapped free with a muted click. "Ma'am, please remain seated." The voice came from her right. A flight attendant, mid-20s, dark hair pulled into a bun so tight it made her forehead shine, had abandoned the drink service and was moving quickly up the aisle. Emily didn't break eye contact. "You're not getting a response from the cockpit, are you?" The woman froze. Not completely. Her lips kept moving, repeating something about turbulence, about safety. But her eyes gave her away. Before she could push past, another jolt hit. Not a shiver, not a wobble. A full-body lurch that sent a food tray clattering into the aisle. Gasps, a muffled cry in the distance. Emily heard it. Faint, almost drowned under the engine hum. The pitch of an alarm. Not the chime used for cabin announcements. Not the triple tone for decompression. This was sharper, insistent, mechanical. The kind of sound pilots didn't want passengers to hear. The intercom clicked again. This time, it was a woman's voice, rushed, tight, a flight attendant. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We are currently experiencing a situation in the flight deck. If there is a licensed pilot on board, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." The words hit the cabin like a cold wind. A couple of heads swiveled down the aisle. The man in the business suit looked up from his phone, mouth open. A teenage boy actually laughed once. High-pitched, disbelieving. Before falling silent, Emily stood. She didn't rush. She didn't wave her arms or shout, "I'm here." She simply reached into the duffel under her seat, unzipped the outer compartment, and withdrew a black nylon folder. She opened it so the attendant could see the contents without question. A laminated FAA commercial pilot's license and a Department of Homeland Security ID. "I'm Captain Emily Parker," she said, voice even, formally with the Air Force and Pacific Skies Airlines, qualified on Boeing 737s, 747s, and Airbus A320s. I need access to the cockpit now. The attendant's mouth parted. You're really a pilot? I'm your best shot at landing this aircraft, Emily said. Now please, let me through. A fraction of hesitation. Then the attendant stepped aside, unclipping the jump seat latch and leading her forward. Gasps followed her down the aisle, whispers blooming like sparks. She ignored them. The carpet under her shoes seemed to stretch endlessly toward the cockpit door. Even before she reached it, Emily saw something she didn't like. The emergency keypad was in override mode. Someone had already unlocked it from the inside. Her hand tightened on the latch. The door swung open. For a moment, she just stood there. The co-pilot was slumped sideways in the seat, oxygen mask dangling from one hand, eyes closed, skin a waxy shade of gray. The captain was still upright, barely. Fumbling with the controls, his face flushed and sweating, words slurring as he turned toward her. Oxygen. Failure, he rasped. Something's in the air vent. Emily moved without thinking. She slammed the emergency ventilation override, sealing the cockpit's airflow, reached behind the seat, grabbed the backup mask, and forced it over the captain's mouth and nose. It wasn't enough. His eyes rolled back. His body sagged. Now there was only the hum of the engines and the rising chorus of warning tones from the panels. Emily slid into the left seat. The controls were sluggish. Autopilot disconnected. The aircraft was drifting south off its planned route, toward restricted airspace. Her fingers flew over the console, checking hydraulic pressure, fuel levels, nav input. No joy from the main comms. She switched to emergency frequencies. Los Angeles Center, this is Flight 782. Declaring emergency, both pilots incapacitated. Possible toxic event on board. Request immediate emergency vector. Do you copy? Static. Then, a crackle. Flight 782. Say again. Who's on the mic? This is Captain Emily Parker, licensed FA commercial pilot. Now assuming command of Pacific Airways Flight 782. I'm flying solo. A pause. Copy that. Flight 782. We're diverting you to Edwards Air Force Base. Emergency cruise on standby. Can you maintain altitude? Emily scanned the gauges. Autopilot dead. Hydraulics slow but functional. Fuel tight but manageable. I can hold altitude for now, she said. I'll need a straight-in descent. No steep turns. I don't trust the controls. Understood. Edwards is clear. Winds 5 knots north. You have priority landing. She clicked the intercom. Her voice filled the cabin for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Emily Parker speaking. We've had a medical emergency in the cockpit. I've assumed command of the aircraft. And we're diverting to Edwards Air Force Base in California. The crew will give you instructions. We are in control. Silence followed. Not disbelief, not panic, just silence. The kind that comes when every person on board realizes the same thing. The stranger in 23B was the reason they still had a chance. The cockpit felt smaller than it was, walls pressing in, air heavy despite the emergency vent override. The panel lights blinked in uneven rhythm, warning tones layering over one another like an orchestra warming up in the wrong key. Emily kept her breathing even behind the oxygen mask, hands steady, eyes moving in a practice sweep. Attitude indicator, altimeter, airspeed, engine RPM, hydraulic pressure. The autopilot was gone. The navigation screen lagged a full second behind. In a fight, 1 second could kill you. In the sky, it could take 320 people with it. She adjusted the yoke with careful precision, feeling the sluggish. Given the hydraulics, the controls responded, but it was like steering a heavy truck on ice. Every correction required muscle and patience. Too much force, and she'd overcompensate. The co-pilot was still out cold. The captain sat slumped. In the observer's seat now, a thin line of sweat running along his jaw. mask pressed tight to his face. His eyelids fluttered, but he wasn't ready to help, which meant she was truly alone. Emily toggled the radio back to emergency frequency. Flight 782 to LA. Center. Confirm emergency landing vector to Edwards. Need runway availability and rescue readiness. The reply came back clearer this time. Captain Parker, runway 22L is yours. Wind steady. Brake nets ready. Hazmat and medics are staged. Confirm souls on board. Emily didn't hesitate. 320. She didn't add +1 ghost. That was what they used to call her in the Air Force. Ghost Hawk. Precision under pressure. The pilot who never cracked. She wasn't thinking about that now. She was thinking about descent angle, fuel burn, and the stubborn rightward pull on the yoke that told her she might have asymmetrical flaps to deal with later. The radio crackled again. Flight 782. Be advised, you've got company. Fighter escort, 2 F-16s at your 9 and 3 o'clock. Emily risked a glance out the side window. Sleek shadows slid into view, sunlight flashing off their canopies. They were close enough to see her, close enough to see the calm in her movements. One of them tipped his wings in acknowledgement. She returned it barely. Before focusing forward again, a knock at the cockpit door. She didn't look up. Captain Parker? It was a man's voice, firm, professional. The lead flight attendant, Scott. Emily cracked the door an inch without taking her eyes off the horizon. Talk. What do you need from us? Cabin calm, she said. Everyone buckled. For the rest of the flight, your strongest crew at the exits during landing. We might come in heavy. Scott nodded. Anything else? Emily hesitated, then allowed herself one more truth. You might hear the fighters on approach. Don't panic the passengers. They're just watching over us. When the door closed, she glanced back at the escort again. There was comfort in knowing they were there, but they were useless if she lost control before reaching the runway. 15 minutes to descent. She ran the pre-landing checks manually. No co-pilot to call them out, just her own voice in her head. Landing gear. Functional. Flap hydraulics. Sticky. She eased the lever. The left flaps responded, deploying to 30 degrees. The right flaps stopped at 22. The plane listed slightly, nose yawing right. Emily swore under her breath. She'd have to land with asymmetrical lift. Keep constant rudder pressure and fight the roll all the way down. It wasn't impossible, but it was the kind of thing that chewed up rookies and spat them into the ground. She adjusted trim to compensate and opened the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're on final approach into Edwards Air Force Base. Keep your heads down and follow crew instructions during landing. It may be firm, but we're bringing you home. The words came out steady, almost casual. That was the trick. You never let them hear your pulse. Below, the desert was rising into view, flat and endless, broken only by the pale ribbon of the runway. Emily adjusted the throttles, feeling the drag of the faulty flaps. The fighter escort peeled away now, banking hard and vanishing into the horizon. The sky was hers alone. 10 miles out. Edwards Tower, Flight 782, on file for 22L. Request brake assist on landing. Affirmative. 782. You're cleared to brake hard. Emergency teams in position. She didn't need to be told twice. The descent angle was shallow. Deliberate. Too steep, and the hydraulics might not keep up. Her left foot held firm on the rudder. Right hand feathering the throttle to balance the asymmetry. 5 miles in the cabin. Scott's voice echoed. Brace, brace, heads down, stay. Down. In the cockpit, Emily whispered to the plane itself. Come on, work with me. The runway widened in the windscreen. She flared the nose just enough to soften the impact. The wheels hit hard. A shudder rolled through the fuselage. Smoke streaked from the tires. She stomped the brakes, holding pressure against the aircraft's desperate pull to the right. The brake met at the runway's end loomed. 10 seconds, 5, The plane screamed against its own momentum. Then it stopped. Silence. In the cabin, someone sobbed. Then the applause began, ragged at first, then swelling until it filled the fuselage. Emily didn't smile. Not yet. Her hands were still on the controls. Her breathing still measured. Edwards Tower, Flight 782 is down. Request immediate medical for 2 incapacitated pilots. Cabin secure. The reply came back fast. Copy. 782. Cruise rolling now. Flashing lights streaked toward the aircraft. Hazmat suits, paramedics, firefighters. Emily leaned back. Exhaling slowly, the danger had passed, but she knew the storm outside the runway was just beginning. The applause faded into a stunned quiet, like the cabin itself couldn't decide whether to breathe or hold still. Through the cockpit glass, Emily could see the rush of motion on the runway. Rescue trucks lining up, emergency lights flashing. In sharp bursts against the flat desert horizon, hazmat crews were already in position, their movements quick and practiced. She powered down the throttles, cut fuel flow, and began the shutdown sequence. Old habits. Always make sure the machine is safe before you let yourself be. The co-pilot was still unconscious. The captain behind her groaned, mask still in place, trying to focus. You landed? His voice was a scrape of air. Emily gave the smallest nod. You're okay. Stay seated. Medics are coming. She toggled the intercom. Cabin crew, remain seated until instructed by ground personnel. We'll disembark in stages. The voice that had carried them home was now clipped, professional, and utterly calm. The first medics reached the cockpit, ducking inside with portable oxygen and scanning equipment. Hazmat teams followed, sealing the flight deck to check air systems. One of them muttered something about a contamination alert, confirming what Emily had suspected from the moment she saw the pilots in the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to see through the open cockpit door. Scott stepped in front of them, holding a hand up. Not yet. Captain Parker, he said quietly to her. They want to see you, to thank you. Emily's eyes didn't leave the checklist she was completing. Right now, they need order more than they need closure. Let's get them off the plane first. He hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes later, the rear cabin doors opened. Desert air swept in, hot, dry, and startling after hours of recycled oxygen. Flight attendants worked in teams, releasing passengers row by row toward the portable stairs. Medics guided the elderly down, checked vitals, handed out water bottles. The few who stepped onto the tarmac looked back, not at the runway or the base beyond, but at the aircraft, at the cockpit windows. A silhouette still moved inside. She saved us, one man said simply, voice carrying in the dry air. Emily stayed in her seat until the cabin was nearly empty. Only when the last passenger stepped onto the stairs did she finally stand, run her palm over the control panel one last time, and step into the aisle. The seat stretched before her like a city left behind. Scattered blankets, half-finished drinks, forgotten earbuds, a space that had been one heartbeat away from becoming a headline. She walked out without looking back. On the tarmac, a small group of military personnel approached. One of them, older, with the bearing of command, held a printout in one hand. Her credentials, Captain Emily Parker, he said, almost to himself, then, quieter, I'll be damned. You know her? The base commander asked. She flew recon over Helmand Province. The older man said, Ghost Hawk, I thought she was gone. Emily didn't break stride. She went straight to the medics, gave her statement, submitted to a quick examination, and insisted the crew be treated before her. The press had already gathered beyond the fence, lenses pointed, waiting. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. Some storms you don't walk into. You let them pass over you. By nightfall, most of the passengers had been processed and sent to temporary shelters. Emily sat in a folding chair beside a mobile command truck, sipping water, watching the controlled Chaos wind down, Brielle. The young flight attendant she'd spoken to on board approached hesitantly. I just wanted to say. She stopped, searching for words. I've never seen anything like that. Like you. Emily looked up at her. You kept your crew steady. That's not nothing. Brielle gave a small, tearful laugh. We all thought you were just a tourist, Emily's gaze drifted back to the aircraft. Some tourists carry more baggage than others. The next morning, the hangar smelled of jet fuel and desert dust. Outside, the sun was just breaking the horizon, spilling pale light across the grounded silver fuselage of Flight 782. Emily had slept less than 3 hours in the officers' barracks, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. Every time her eyes closed, the sound of the hydraulic strain on final approach came back. She was halfway through a paper cup of bitter coffee when a voice cut through the quiet. Captain Parker. She looked up. A man in his 40s, clean-cut, wearing a navy blazer and a badge clipped to his belt, stood a few feet away. Daniel Reyes, senior investigator, National Transportation Safety Board. I'm here to ask a few questions, he said. Off the record for now. Emily gestured toward a small, empty side room. Let's do it in there. They sat across from each other at a bare metal table. Reyes placed a small digital recorder between them. Pressed a button. Name for the record. Captain Emily Parker, U.S. Air Force, retired. You were listed as a passenger on Flight 782. 23B, aisle seat. She corrected automatically. Not as roomy as the cockpit. That pulled a faint smile from him. Walk me through when you realized something was wrong. She did. Step by step, the unusual vibration, the unexpected seatbelt sign, the clipped captain's transmission, the look in the flight attendant's eyes, the unlocked cockpit door, the unconscious crew. You've flown commercial before? Simulated, she said. Trained in multi-engine conversions my last year of service. Once you've flown an F-15 through anti-air fire, an Airbus isn't intimidating. Just different. Slower. Like trading a knife fight for a chess match. Reyes scribbled something, then glanced up. Your assessment of the cause? Emily leaned back slightly. Slow leak from the avionics bay. Maybe. Odorless neurotoxic fumes. Wouldn't knock them out instantly, but long enough exposure would. Sensor. Probably disconnected during maintenance. His pen stopped mid-scratch. That's specific. She didn't answer. You landed with partial flaps, compromised hydraulics, and a 15-degree yaw bias, he said finally. That's borderline impossible, Emily shrugged. Good day for miracles. When the debrief was over, she stepped outside into the wind. The desert stretched out in every direction. Flat, indifferent, in the distance. The tail of Flight 782 was just visible over the roofs of the hangars. Captain Parker. She turned. A woman in civilian clothes jogged toward her, a press badge bouncing against her chest. Maya Lin, freelance reporter. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday, she said, breathless. Just one question. Why didn't you reveal yourself sooner? Emily crossed her arms. Because I wasn't there to be anyone's hero. I was taking a break from being one. Maya tilted her head. Your service record is legendary, combat sorties, hostage rescues, 2 nominations for the Distinguished Flying Cross. And I walked away, Emily said flatly. Because I couldn't keep watching friends go down in flames, I came back stateside and stayed out of the cockpit until yesterday. Maya's pen stilled. The honesty in Emily's tone made her hesitate before trying another angle. So why act then? Emily's eyes drifted to the horizon. Because I didn't want anyone to be forgotten. She walked away without waiting for the next question. 3 days after the landing, Emily sat on the edge of a hotel bed she hadn't slept in. Not really. She'd closed her eyes in short bursts. But the noise outside was relentless. Not the hum of jet engines anymore, but the rolling wave of attention pounding against her door. Journalists had camped in the parking lot. Photographers lingered by the elevators. Her parents back in Ohio had already been hounded by local news crews. On TV, the story had taken on a life of its own. Mystery military pilot lands passenger jet after crew collapse scrolled across one network. Another had splashed GHOST Hawk resurfaces in bold type over a grainy telephoto shot of her silhouette in the cockpit. Her phone was a graveyard of unread messages. Politicians she'd never met wanted photo ops. Talk show producers dangled primetime specials. A Hollywood agent claimed rights to her story. She ignored all of it. When she'd landed that plane, she hadn't been thinking about cameras. She hadn't been thinking about legacy. She'd been thinking about the 320 people strapped into that fuselage with her. At 8:00 a.m., a knock came. Light, hesitant. Emily opened the door to find Brielle, the young flight attendant from the flight, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a thick envelope. "Thought you might need this," Brielle said, handing her the drink. "And?" "This." Inside the envelope were dozens of handwritten notes, some in careful cursive, some in rushed scrawl. One was from a child, a drawing of a plane with Emily standing on top, arms outstretched like a comic book hero. Emily stared at the page, throat tightening. "I don't know how to say thank you enough," Brielle said. "So I'll just say, you reminded me why I love the sky. I'm applying to flight school." Emily looked up, eyes glinting. "You'll be a damn good pilot." Later that morning, she was escorted to an Air Force briefing room, though she wasn't there as an officer. Colonel Mercer was waiting, leaning against the table like he'd been there an hour. "You're trending higher than the Super Bowl," he said with a half-smile. "Exactly the nightmare I was trying to avoid." He chuckled, but his expression sobered. "You've been requested to speak before the FAA board next week. Pentagon's talking commendation. They want to make this national news." "It already is," she said. "Not like this," he replied. "We're talking legacy stuff, public. Honors, maybe even a reinstatement ceremony." "I'm not coming back, Colonel," she said flatly. "I did what I had to do. That doesn't mean I want to wear the uniform again." "I know," he said quietly, "but the world's not asking. You two, it's trying to thank you. Let it." She didn't answer by that evening. The noise outside her hotel had reached a fever pitch. Offers came in disguised as interviews. Interviews disguised as tributes. Someone even sent her a draft book proposal titled "The Passenger Who Landed Flight 782. She ignored them all. The only people she wanted to speak to were the passengers. 2. Niger. She booked a small community hall under a false name and invited anyone from Flight 782 who could make it. Over 100 came. No cameras, no reporters. Just survivors, crew, and the woman who'd flown them to safety. There were no speeches, no grand introductions. Just quiet, raw gratitude. People hugged her without asking. Some cried. A woman in her 70s took her hands. "I was flying to meet my grandson. He was born the day before the flight. If it weren't for you." She trailed off, eyes wet. Emily didn't speak. She just held her. A man in a worn Marine Corps cap stood straighter when he approached her. He gave a sharp, deliberate salute. "You reminded me what valor looks like," he said. The NTSB report came in 2 days later. Emily sat in a private briefing with Daniel Reyes as he laid it out. A slow leak in the avionics bay had released odorless, neurotoxic fumes into the cockpit. The ventilation system's redirect function had failed. The sensor designed to detect the leak had been disabled during a recent maintenance cycle. Whether by oversight or negligence was still under investigation. The conclusion was simple. If Emily hadn't acted when she did, the plane would have drifted off course until fuel exhaustion, likely crashing somewhere over the uninhabited desert. "Your decision saved every soul on board," Reyes said plainly. Emily just nodded. The FI chairing was held behind closed doors at her request. She answered every technical question in calm. Precise language, no dramatics, no embellishments. When asked if she considered herself a hero, she gave the same answer she'd given to Brielle, to Mercer, to herself in the quiet hours of the night. I did what any trained pilot would do. I just wasn't supposed to be on duty that day. When she left the room, there were no cameras, no applause, just the faint, steady hum of an airport beyond the walls. Planes taking off, others landing. The rhythm of a world that kept moving, whether you wanted it to or not. That night, she walked alone down a dim street near the hotel. The noise was finally behind her. At least for a while. The desert air was cool. Above, the sky was clear. The stars so sharp they looked like you could touch them. She stopped, looking up for a long time. Somewhere in her chest, the weight of the last few days shifted. Not gone, just lighter. It had been a week since the landing when Emily finally went home. Her flight back to Ohio was booked under an alias, but somehow the airline staff still knew. At the gate, the attendant glanced at her boarding pass, looked up, and whispered, "Thank you." The captain of the flight came out to meet her before boarding. "Can't tell you what it means to us, what you did." Emily gave the faintest nod. "Just fly safe." Her townhouse was exactly as she'd left it, quiet still. The air faintly smelling of the cedar polish she used every spring. The shelf of old medals gathered dust in the corner. The flight jacket stayed zipped in the closet. She placed the envelope of passenger letters on the shelf, beside a photo of her old squadron. Then she added something else, her wings, not because she was returning to duty, but because she had remembered who she was. Not a mystery, not a myth, just a woman who still knew how to fly. 6 weeks passed. The world's attention moved on. Headlines fading from Ghost Hawk resurfaces to FAA, investigates systemic failures to passenger flights resume. Emily moved on too, mostly, but she noticed herself slowing every time she drove past the small airfield just outside of town. She never turned in, never parked. Just slowed enough to see the Cessnas lined up like patient horses, waiting for someone to give them purpose. One Thursday morning, she was sitting in the corner booth of her favorite coffee shop, reading the local paper when a voice interrupted her. "You always sit like that," the voice said, legs half crossed, left thumb drumming the table. Emily looked up to see Brielle, standing there with a duffel bag over her shoulder and dark circles under her eyes. "You didn't say you were coming," Emily said, rising to hug her. "Didn't know until last night," Brielle replied. "Had an interview, flight school entrance. Exam in Dayton." Emily grinned. "Told you you'd be a damn good pilot." "They said the same thing," Brielle smiled. "I start next month." They walked through the park nearby, a ribbon of green scattered with kids. Cyclists, old couples feeding ducks. The air was crisp, the kind of morning that reminded Emily why she'd always loved the ground and why the sky had never let her go. "Still have dreams about it," Brielle admitted. "Not nightmares, just flashes, the alarms, the tilt of the cabin, your voice over the intercom." "It doesn't leave you," Emily said. "It just settles in." Brielle hesitated. "Do you miss it?" Emily didn't answer right away. She watched the light on the pond, the wind rippling the surface. Every day. That night, she sat at her desk for a long time before finally opening her laptop. The inbox was still flooded. Messages from passengers, pilots, strangers. One email stopped her cold. It was from a teenage girl who had been terrified of flying her whole life. "After reading about you, I told my parents I want to take my first flight. If you were on that plane, I know I'd be safe. You made the sky feel like home." Emily read it twice, 3 times. Then she closed the laptop. 3 days later, she drove to the airfield. This time, she didn't just slow down. She parked. At the far end of the runway, a small Cessna 172 sat waiting. Beside it, Tommy, a retired flight instructor she'd trained with years ago, held out a headset. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Emily said. tightening the strap. But I'm tired of pretending I'm not. The engine roared to life, familiar and forgiving. Her hands found the yoke like they'd never left it. The runway stretched ahead, and as she accelerated, she felt it, the spark in her chest, the old thrill catching like kindling. Takeoff was smooth, effortless, inevitable. At 5,000 feet, the town below looked small and soft, the sky endless. Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. "Still got it?" Emily smiled. Never lost it. A month after the landing, Emily was standing in front of a room that smelled faintly of engine oil and whiteboard markers. The hangar classroom wasn't big, maybe 30 seats, but everyone was filled. Aviation students sat in neat rows. Notebooks open, some in crisp polo shirts with their flight school logo, others in worn jackets with the frayed edges of people who'd been saving for lessons 1 hour at a time. There were no media cameras, no news crews, just the hum of the old overhead lights and the soft shuffle of people waiting for her to speak. She'd agreed to this reluctantly. She didn't enjoy public speaking, especially when it meant talking about herself. But Colonel Mercer had framed it differently. You won't be talking about you. You'll be talking about them. The next. Ones who have to choose whether to act or freeze. So she had said yes. Emily didn't stand at a podium. She stood in front of them with her hands in her pockets, the sleeves of her leather jacket pushed up, her hair pulled back. She looked like she could have been one of them, except for the way the room tilted slightly toward her, as if every ear was already tuned in. When I was 26, she began. I flew my first combat mission. I thought I knew what pressure was. I thought it was the noise in your headset, the missiles in the air, the way your hands shook after you landed. She paused, scanning the room. I was wrong. Real pressure isn't what's trying to kill you. It's what's depending on you. The room stayed still. Flying isn't about adrenaline. It's about responsibility. You think you're chasing clouds and freedom, but the truth is, you're signing up to carry people's lives in your hands. And when something goes wrong, and it will, it's not the hours in your logbook that will save you. It's the decision to act. A young man in the second row scribbled furiously in his notebook. Emily's gaze softened. On flight 782. I didn't know if I could save it. That's the part the headlines leave out. I didn't know if the hydraulics would hold, or if the asymmetrical flaps would pull us off the runway. I just knew no one else was going to walk through that cockpit door. So I did. She let that sit for a moment. I didn't save the plane because I was a hero. I saved it because I refused to let fear fly it into the ground. Silence. The kind that isn't empty. The kind that's full of thought. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. When you're up there, Emily continued, the passengers don't know your name. They don't care about your awards or your flight hours. They care about one thing, that when it matters most, you will choose them over yourself. Her voice lowered, but the weight in it didn't. That's the job, not the view, not the freedom. The responsibility. When she stopped speaking, no one moved for a few seconds. Then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't the kind you get at graduations or air shows. It was measured, deliberate. The sound of people who understood they'd just been told something they needed to remember. In the weeks that followed, Emily quietly accepted a part-time role mentoring young pilots. She kept it low profile, meeting with small groups, answering technical questions, running simulations, and, only when pressed, sharing pieces of her story. She turned down every TV appearance, ignored the book deals, let the Hollywood offers die in someone else's inbox. The story spread anyway, but not because she pushed it. The passengers carried it, the crew shared it, and strangers remembered it. 6 months after the landing, Emily found herself back at LAX. She hadn't planned it. A friend had asked her to pick them up from a morning flight, and she'd agreed without thinking about the gate number until she got there. It was the same concourse Flight 782 had boarded from. She stood for a moment in the middle of the terminal. The noise of rolling luggage and boarding announcements surrounding her. Different flight, different destination. Same patch of sky outside. A little boy ran past her, his tiny suitcase rattling behind him on its plastic wheels. His mother hurried after him, calling his name with a laugh that held a trace of exasperation. Emily watched them for a moment before walking toward the big glass windows that faced the runways. A gate agent passed by, then stopped, did a double take. Wait. You're the one from that flight, right? The pilot? The tourist-turned-hero? Emily gave a faint, almost amused smile. I was never just a tourist. The agent looked like they wanted to say more, but Emily was already turning back toward the window. Outside, a 737 was taxiing, nose pointed toward the runway, engines spooled up. The aircraft began to roll, slowly at first, then faster, until the nose lifted and the wheels left the earth. Emily followed it with her eyes, watching it rise into the sunlight, the landing gear folding neatly away, the blue swallowing it whole. She didn't feel the tug of regret she'd feared when she left the Air Force. She didn't feel the anxiety she'd felt before boarding a commercial flight for the first time after she retired. She felt pride, not the loud kind, not the kind that needs parades or headlines, the quiet kind that settles in your chest and stays there, because the sky wasn't behind her, it was still hers. She let the thought sit, the way a pilot lets an aircraft find its trim, balanced, steady. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.